Now, looking at state provision, and one of the things, biggest things in this country that's provided by the state is obviously the NHS, the National Health Service. And there's lots of economic issues concerned with that, but we can also relate this to education as well and our local council services. So again, same specification objectives, but not looking at all of these things here. We're just mainly focusing on state provision for this one. So state provision is where the public sector or the government provide a good or service. Now, lots of my students assume that this means providing it for free, but it doesn't always mean for free. It can be providing it for free at the point of use. Remember that education and healthcare isn't actually free in this country. We do pay through our taxes. It's just free at the point of use. Or it could mean charging for it as well. So, yes, if you are hurt in an accident and you go to hospital, you're not going to have to pay. But if you need a prescription, the government do expect you to make a contribution towards prescriptions if you are working or above a certain age. So this can be actually a very common essay, and when I pull these points up now, it's going to look like there's not very much to write, but there's loads that you can write about this. So thinking about, should the government provide things? Is it efficient, or should we leave everything to the private sector? Well, we already know through studying market failure that the private sector, one of the problems with the private sector or the free market economy is it doesn't take account of external costs and benefits. So if the state provides it, because their objective is not profit making, they will be thinking about a more possibly more allocatively efficient output where society is benefiting, so where we're minimising any welfare losses or deadweight losses. So they're going to take account or try and take account of external costs and benefits. Now remember, a little evaluation point here is that that's actually quite difficult to do because a lot of these external costs and benefits are missing markets, so they don't have a market value. So you can't walk into a shop and say, can I have 50 years of good health, please? There are things obviously that can contribute towards that, such as a good diet and exercise, but there's no product that's just, a box of good health or something like that. So it's actually really difficult to put a monetary value on those things. The other thing to say about this point, just this point, which looks very, very small, is if you are doing an essay about government intervention in the healthcare market, say for example, or the education market, you can draw loads of diagrams here. So you could draw positive externalities in consumption to show the external benefits and that there'll be underconsumption as well. You could even draw some negative externalities in consumption and talk about how people who aren't immunised spreading bacteria and problems and infectious diseases, horrible infectious diseases that existed. If you've studied history at primary school, you probably looked at the plague, and history at high school, you might have looked at the flu after the World Wars. I think it was the First World War. I'm not too sure. I'm showing my ignorance with history there. But what I do know is that it killed a lot of people. And obviously there's external costs of that and negative externalities. So you can make a big thing about how the market doesn't take account of these external costs and these external benefits. So it's an allocatively inefficient output. So small point, but lots of stuff that you can write about there to get some good marks. Also, when the public sector provide things, and I'm thinking really about the NHS and education, when they provide things, it's usually on quite a large scale, and we can see that with the NHS and education. And large-scale businesses can benefit from economies of scale. So whether unit costs in the long run are lower because they're benefiting from purchasing economies of scale, managerial specialist, all of those types of economies of scale, and you can look back at the other presentation on that to do some revision over those things. You could make a lovely evaluation point there as well, talking about how they might get too large and suffer from communication problems, coordination problems, motivation problems, all of these being diseconomies of scale. And I think that links quite nicely to recent health problems or problems with the health sector. usually when there are, you know, mix-ups at hospitals and things like that. It's because of poor communication and just because it's a really complex operation to run. So let's have a look at some benefits of market provision. So the profit motive is meant to encourage firms to lower costs, so maybe be more innovative, more prudent with their spending. So this should mean that they're more productively efficient than firms or organisations that don't have a profit motive, or so the theory goes. But it could get them cutting corners. Here's a nice evaluation point for that one. It could get them cutting corners, and also you know, if say we didn't have the NHS and it was all kind of the private sector, what they might do is just provide services for those people who are rich enough to afford it. So we'll have problems with inequality and inequity, but they also might provide the services that are really easy for them to provide and that are the most profitable, and not do the surgeries that are really complex, really difficult, and might not be as profitable. So we could find that it really harms some groups, specific groups in the country as well. The benefits of market provision, though, and this is for anything, and this is really why at the beginning of the course we kind of study economics and we study demand and supply. It's that argument of the invisible hand. So the signalling, the incentive, and the rationing functions should provide what customers want, and it should be most allocatively efficient, and it should mean that, you know, we get the right quantity supplied to the right people for the right price and all of those types of things. So often when we're looking at systems where they've been centrally planned, if you look into the history of any kind of communist states and those types of things, we find that it is very hard for them to get the levels right, the quantity provided right. So they might find that they have huge abundances of products that people really don't want, and they have a shortage of the products that people really, really want. Whereas demand and supply is meant to get rid of that problem. Not completely, there is always going to be some elements of disequilibrium, but it's the prices adjusting are meant to signal and provide incentives and rationing, and get to the equilibrium point eventually. So there you can kind of do a diagram of excess demand or excess supply and show that eventually it should get to equilibrium and meant to be an efficient way. Obviously that's juxtaposed with this point here, which if you don't take account of those external costs and those external benefits, it won't get to that point of equilibrium where social costs equal social benefits. So here's a slightly different thing, just looking at what happens when we provide something or we allow something to be free at the point of use or zero charge. So if we're looking at, I think this is a really good example of healthcare really. So the government, because they don't have that profit motive, they just have kind of like a fixed supply. So the price changing isn't having an effect on supply here. They're just looking at like this is the maximum amount that we can provide, which is why our supply curve is perfectly inelastic. But demand we see is downward sloping, as we'd assume, you know, the income and the substitution effect. And when we set the price at zero, which is along here, what we get is excess demand, and it's a shortage, and this is what we see in the headlines when we're looking at healthcare, that there's sometimes too few beds for patients and treatments and all of those types of things. So you've got this amount of people wanting the services, you've got this amount that you can provide, so you've got a shortage, and then you get to that problem of, well, how do we decide who is going to get this? And it goes back to that fundamental economic problem, scarce resources and limited wants. How are we going to decide? And that's why hospitals have these really complex systems, especially with organ donation, about who's going to get it, and it's really tough making that decision. But we obviously believe in this country that that decision shouldn't be made about who can afford it. It should be about who's most in need or has the best chances of survival. But it's really, either way, any way that you look at it, it seems really kind of harsh when you're deciding or making decisions about life or death. It comes down to all these like normative values. It's really, really tough. So there we go, a cheery note to end on, that state provision.